My heart like you do, and I could search for all eternity long and find there is none like you, there is none like you.
I would say chances are pretty good that you might have just skipped over that question. You might have heard it, but maybe it didn't carry any weight. Maybe it didn't have any real impact. But would you let me ask you that question again? Because it's the most important question you'll ever answer. Are you a follower of Jesus? Now, before you answer this question too quickly, let me clarify what I'm not asking. I'm not asking the following. Do you attend church regularly? Do your grandparents or parents, are they Christians? Do you own 3 or more Bibles? I'm not even asking, are you a good person? The question I'm asking is, are you a follower of Jesus? My point is that I think many of us are quick to say, yes, I'm a follower of Jesus. But I'm not really sure we understand what we're saying when we say it. It may seem that there are many followers of Jesus today. But when we are honest to define the relationship we have with him, I'm not sure that it would be accurate to describe us as followers sometimes. I think there's a better description for it. They're not followers, they're fans. The most basic definition in the dictionary for fan is an enthusiastic admirer. It's the guy who goes to the football game and he doesn't have a shirt on and he paints his chest for his team. He's there in the stands. He's cheering on his team with great joy and pride. But you see, he's never really in the game. He's never on the field. He never has to take a big hit. He knows all about the players. He can rattle off their stats, but he doesn't really know the players. He yells and he cheers, but there's nothing really required of him. There's no real sacrifice that he has to make. And the truth is, as enthusiastic as he really is, when his team loses a few games or they have a few bad seasons, his enthusiasm will wane pretty quickly. It's that woman who never misses the celebrity news shows. She always picks up the latest People's Magazine. She's a huge fan of some actress who's the latest Hollywood sensation. She knows every movie that this woman's ever been in. She knows the high school she went to. She knows her date of birth. She knows the first boyfriend she ever had. This woman even knows this actress's true hair color, something the actress isn't really sure of. You see, she's a big fan, but she's only a fan. She's an enthusiastic admirer. You see, I think Jesus has a lot of fans these days. Fans who sit safely in the stands, cheering him on, but have no clue of the sacrifice and the pain of the field. Fans who know all about him, but don't truly know him. But Jesus was never interested in having fans. When he defines the kind of relationship that he wants us to have with him, enthusiastic admirer was never an option. My concern that as many of our churches today, our sanctuaries are becoming stadiums. And we all come to the stadium on Sunday mornings and we cheer for Jesus. But sometimes we're not truly interested in following him. The biggest threat to our churches today is that the people who call themselves Christians aren't actually interested in following Christ. They want to be close enough to Jesus to get all the benefits, but not so close that it requires anything of them. So this morning, I want to take some time to look at the question, am I a fan or a follower of Jesus? The first step we must take in our journey is difficult. We must take an honest diagnosis of our relationship with Christ. We must be able to look in the mirror and examine our beliefs, our actions, and our motivations. And somehow we have to be able to step back for a moment and take a look at our true relationship that we have with Jesus Christ. So to do this, we must ask ourselves 4 questions in this diagnosis of our current condition. Question number 1 is, have you made a decision for Jesus, or have you committed to Jesus? Now, there's a difference. There shouldn't be a difference, but there is. Many of us have made the decision to believe in Jesus without making a commitment to follow him. The gospel allows for no such distinction. Biblical belief is more than just something that we have as facts in our minds, or we say the right things. Many fans have repeated a prayer, or they've raised their hand, or they've even walked down the aisle at the end of the sermon and made a decision to believe, but didn't make a true commitment to follow. Jesus never offered such an option. He is looking for more than just words of belief. He's looking for how those words are lived out in our lives. When we decide to believe in Jesus without making a commitment to follow him, we become nothing more than fans. We get a glimpse of the difference between making a decision for Jesus and having a commitment to Jesus in John chapter 3 with the story of Nicodemus. You know the story. The religious leader comes to Jesus at night. He comes to him at night, wanting to take his relationship with Jesus to the next level. You see, there would be much for Nicodemus to lose if he went public as a follower of Jesus. He would lose his position in the Sanhedrin. He would lose all credibility as a religious leader in his community. But being a secret admirer of Jesus wouldn't cost him a thing. But becoming a follower would come with a big price tag, and it always does. So Nicodemus finds himself at what would seem to be a surprising crossroads. He has to choose between his religion and following Jesus. You see, Nicodemus had made a decision about Jesus. In verse 2 of John chapter 3, Nicodemus states that he believes that Jesus is from God. But that's not the same as following him. Jesus would not accept a relationship with Nicodemus just that Nicodemus simply believed. Jesus wanted Nicodemus to follow him. And in verse 3, Jesus makes it clear that if Nicodemus wants to be a follower of Jesus, he must be born again. Jesus didn't want just Nicodemus just at night. He wanted Nicodemus during the day as well. So when Nicodemus meets Jesus in John chapter 3, we're left wondering, what is he going to do? His silence would seem to indicate that he was just a fan, an enthusiastic admirer, and not even enthusiastic, he was really just a secret admirer. But the question is, would his belief ever turn into commitment? But it turns out that that's not the last time we see Nicodemus. And in John chapter 7, we see him again. The popularity of Jesus has grown immensely, and the religious leaders are full of fear and jealousy, and they call the Sanhedrin together to meet to find a reason to silence Jesus. And so they try to drum up some kind of accusation to convict him as a false teacher. So Nicodemus is sitting among his peers while they're conspiring to bring Jesus down. Remember, Nicodemus believes that Jesus is from God, but would he say anything? Would his belief translate in any kind of commitment? We find our answer in verse 51. When Nicodemus comes to the defense of Jesus in John chapter 7, verse 51, he said to the Sanhedrin, he says, "Does our law condemn anyone without first hearing him out?" What is he doing? Though Nicodemus stops short of saying he believes, he does risk his career and his reputation and publicly speaks on the behalf of Jesus. This is no longer a private conversation about what he believes. He allows his beliefs to interfere with his life, to interfere with his work, his relationships, and even his financial future. In this moment, he stops just being a fan and he begins his journey of following Jesus. So the first question we must ask ourselves in our honest diagnosis is, have I made a decision for Jesus, or have I made a commitment to Jesus? The second question we must ask ourselves is, do I have knowledge about him or intimacy with him? In the New Testament, we read about a group of religious leaders known as the Pharisees. The Pharisees knew a lot about God, and if somebody wanted to play Bible Trivial Pursuit or Bible Pictionary, these guys would have dominated. They knew all about God, but as we discovered, they didn't really know God. In Matthew 15:8, Jesus describes the Pharisees in this way. He says, "These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me." This description seems to fit most fans I know. Like the Pharisees, fans give their minds to the study of God, but they never truly give their hearts and surrender their hearts over to him. You see, these men had plenty of knowledge about God, but they didn't really know God. What separates fans from followers is often the difference between knowledge and intimacy. In Luke 7, Jesus is invited over to dinner by one of the Pharisees. His name was Simon, and most likely Simon extended this invitation to Jesus after he had finished teaching. For Simon, this having a visiting rabbi over for a meal was considered a religious merit. Like when you sit down to eat with your friends and you bow your head and you say a silent prayer, but you're not actually praying and you just counted to 10. But that's what you're supposed to do, right? So you do it. That's Simon's spirit here. Jesus should have considered an honored guest at this dinner. But it quickly becomes apparent that Simon was spending time with Jesus out of a sense of duty and obligation instead of a desire to honor him. You see, there are certain rules of etiquette at a dinner like this. For instance, the customary greeting for an honored guest would have been a kiss on the cheek. Another part of this first century Middle Eastern custom would have been the washing of feet. And for a special honored guest, you might even have provided them with oil to anoint their head with oil. But when Jesus comes to the house of Simon, there's no kiss of greeting. There's no washing of feet. There's no oil for Jesus' head. These were no accidental oversights. These were quite deliberate. Jesus was ignored and insulted. But don't miss this moment. Simon has spent his entire life studying the Scriptures. By the age of 15, he had memorized the entire Old Testament. The entire Old Testament. He had committed to memory over 300 prophecies about the coming Messiah. But what he doesn't realize is the Messiah is the one who now sits at his table. You see, Simon knew all about Jesus, but he didn't really know Jesus. So the question is, do we just know about Jesus, or do we really know him? Fans have the tendency to confuse their knowledge for intimacy. They don't recognize the difference between knowing about Jesus and truly knowing him. In church, we often get this confused. We've established systems of learning that result in knowledge, but sometimes not necessarily in intimacy. Like the Pharisee in Luke 7, and like many fans today, I spent a number of years confusing my knowledge of Jesus for intimacy with him. Now in 2004, Matt Emmons was one shot away from claiming gold in the Olympics. He was competing in the 50-meter three-position rifle event. He didn't even need a perfect shot to win the gold medal on his final shot. He merely needed to hit his target. The shot he made would have received a score of 8.1, more than enough to win the gold medal. But as what is described as an extremely rare mistake in elite competition, Edmonds fired at the wrong target. Standing in lane 2, he fired at the target in lane 3. His score for a good shot on the wrong target was 0.